It's late on purpose. I'm super excited to have my friend Mike Schwartz here, Director of Sustainability at ChargePoint, to talk about the program that they are building out. As a reminder for everyone, as always, the chat is open, the Q&A is open, so we will make this as interactive as you want it to be. Mike, thank you very much for joining me. I'm excited. I feel like I'm looking into a mirror here. This is the best looking Zoom I've ever been a part of. I love it. I want to start by asking you to sort of set the stage with ChargePoint. Unlike many of the people I've interviewed on the Beekly, you work for a company that is just like doesn't have to make anything up in sustainability. You are the sustainability transition. Like ChargePoint builds electric vehicle charging stations, and the infrastructure to support that. That is what modern sustainability is in a big way. What is it like being at a place like that? How is sustainability discussed compared to what you hear maybe peers at other places that have sustainability programs and not traditionally sustainability focused companies? How they talk about it?
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Um, One contextual piece is that I'm ChargePoint's first director of sustainability, and just yesterday was my first anniversary here. So, however much you can accomplish, thank you, in a year is where I'm sitting. Um, One thing that has been true in every initiative I've taken on or been given since I've been here is that the employee base, so many of my colleagues are here because they want to be part of that transition, because they want to be part of a company that's doing something for sustainability. And we see those statistics all the time. I don't have numbers right in front of me, but of the importance of sustainability for employee talent attraction and retention, for employees overall, more for younger employees. But it's really true that employees want their employers to be responsible. And when we're a company that builds charging stations, as you see behind me in this virtual background of perennial New England autumn, um, it is it's something that means that when I make a request of my colleagues, they're like, "Yeah, I'm in it for it." A lot of companies, you make requests and people say, "I'll get to it when I get to it," or "It's not my priority," or "Why are you bothering me with another request?" But here, it really is at the level of engaging people where they're coming from. They're here because they want to be helping a company be sustainable. So that's from an employee engagement standpoint. From a leadership engagement standpoint, I've taken all the pointers that every successful sustainability leader has put on LinkedIn for the past couple years, few years, that all the conversations at the conferences are around. Sustainability can't be from a public company standpoint where you are by your nature a profit motivated entity whose purpose is to deliver shareholder value. You can't say, yes, sustainability is a good thing and therefore we should spend more money on it. You have to say sustainability is a good for business thing and it's going to help us in our performance as a company. Some of the ways that I've made that case here are so many of our customers, like our employees, work with us because they have their own sustainability interests, because they are either homeowners who are electrifying or companies who are electrifying their fleet or retail entities that want their customers to be able to charge on site. If they're doing that, they have a sustainability program, and how can we align with their sustainability program to be a better partner of them, to have a stickier offering, to differentiate ourselves from our competition? And that's a message that I think was already in the ether before I got here and has landed really well with senior leadership and has opened up doors and taken down whatever barriers there might have been had I approached it in a way where I just said, let's be a cost center because it's the right thing to do.
Let me devil's advocate that one for a second. If you're a charge point and I want chargers because I am Walmart and I have a sustainability program, I'm going to go out to the market. I'm going to say, who makes electric vehicle chargers? And it's ChargePoint and I don't know, two other people. And I'm going to say, well, who's effective and who is definitely not going to go down and who's got good services and who's a good price. And that's what I'm going to buy because I need electric vehicle chargers. Why have your role? Like, what is it that a director of sustainability does at a company that is so obviously sustainability that all everyone's doing is building electric vehicle chargers and talking about how important that is for the grid and for the economy, but also for our decarbonization goals, as opposed to a different company. If you take a, I don't know, if you are Walmart or if you just make stuff, you might need a sustainability person because without that person, there is no decarbonization conversation. There is no what's called product level footprint conversations. There are no renewable energy credit card. Like they don't exist without a sustainability person. But a charge point, I'm gonna buy chargers. Why do I need Mike? Like,
Yeah.
what is the additional value there?
So there's a couple aspects, one of which is that customer facing piece. From a customer facing standpoint, if we have sustainability savvy minded customers who are pushing their partners to be responsible players in sustainability, then part of their bid selection process, whether they're buying EV chargers or they're buying something core to their operations, is going to have some component of their questionnaire, their bid questionnaire, their RFP, RFQ questionnaire around sustainability practices of their partners. And some of those practices are things like, where are you sourcing your materials from? Are you being responsible in how you're building what you're building? And those are things that maybe they're worth on the order of 5% of the points on a bid process for a scored bid. And bids are won or lost on margins of less than 5% of the points. So it is really one place for us to be able to differentiate ourselves from that standpoint. There's also um, just the ability to say, we are aligned with you on your goals. If you have a public facing goal to um, have, there's a few different things that we could talk about. We can talk about decarbonization. We can talk about conflict minerals management to say that you want to source your conflict minerals from all responsible countries. Then if you work with a company that is actively um, encouraging its supply base to move away from the riskier smelters, then that is one area where um, there is room
I
to
think there's a lot of ways to build a
differentiate.
charger. ChargePoint builds
Yeah.
it the other way, and here's
The,
all the reasons why. The other guys, sure, they also have electric vehicle charging, but it's the bad way. Here's all the reasons why.
and the from another side that's not customer facing, there's also a whole realm of regulations that impact us. And I think we're probably going to talk about it in a couple
Yeah,
different ways, but I mentioned conflict mineral reporting. That's something that we have to do under the Securities and Exchange Commission rules, and that's something that needs someone to manage it. There's also a plethora and a growing amount of laws under the umbrella of extended producer responsibility. That's how we manage things that we use. So how we manage our products at their end of life, how we manage the batteries that are in the small batteries that are in some of our products, how we manage packaging and where we source that packaging from and what happens to the packaging at the end of its life. And those are just a couple examples of pretty large legislation or regulation that needs someone
yeah.
to have an understanding of what those impacts are, what those rules are, and how to shepherd a company through the process.
Yeah, you talked about customers, so let's start there. I was Googling before this, and I think I looked up like ChargePoint sustainability report to see if there was one. And I didn't go any further. I'm not sure if there is or is not one. It did not come up. But the first link is a sustainability website on ChargePoint. And you talk about some of the things that you do. And then at the bottom, there's examples of companies who have talked about partnerships with ChargePoint in their own reporting. So exactly what you're saying, which is our customer, I forgot who's on there now, but whatever, Walmart, our customer has their sustainability report and they are proud to work with ChargePoint and they talk about working with ChargePoint. So the perfect example. However, maybe this is a quirk of how the website was built, or maybe not. All the reports are on that page were from 2019. So the customers who the company listed on the website as talking about ChargePoint and reporting on this stuff were from 2019, which is probably for a lot of reasons. But I thought it was an interesting uh, data point to basically ask the question, how is that changing as reports are getting shorter, as public statements are changing, as incentives to build electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure is changing? I know you've only been there for a year, so you don't have the full story, but what do you how's the conversation at the company evolved, or what have you learned from people about how different it is to be ChargePoint today than it was to be ChargePoint 2 years ago or 5 years ago?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. One is the task you added to my plate to have
I'll
a look
fix
at
that. I'll send you the link.
this website that predates me, and has not been a mandate that's come down to me from anyone within the organization so far. But I did just take note of the fact that there are 2019 examples and only 2019 examples. We certainly do have more recent engagements with companies who are happy to work with us as part of their decarbonization journey. Um, but the evolution has been an interesting one. I mean, without getting deep into the current political climate, North America consistent, has not been consistent in its push. And this is a moment where, there's moments where there's headwinds, where there's tailwinds, and this is one where we look at different markets in different ways, and we operate in North America and in Europe. And in Europe, you see records being broken consistently around EV adoption, and so there's big opportunity there. Um, from a sustainability standpoint, there was previously a sustainability headcount, not at the director level, but a headcount or ESG, I think was the title at ChargePoint. And that's probably actually, that website, if there's 2019 examples, that website might predate the previous headcount. Um,
There, I dropped
uh,
the link. Don't all look now, but there it is for your perusal.
um, but in any case, the things that we focused on are many of them are impact driven as opposed to just the marketing and storytelling side. We don't have a sustainability report. We are working on various disclosable things. We've completed our first double materiality assessment. Happy to talk a little more about that. We are in the process of working on our first to be published greenhouse gas inventory. Those things together with a little bit more around as we develop our strategy will likely be our first sustainability disclosures. Um, and that's something that will help us again engage with those customer questionnaires, also with some other raters and rankers we are evaluated by, and by having public documentation, we know we can help our performance. And those are just a couple of ways in which
Yeah.
we're currently evolving.
One more question here, and then we'll jump into some other stuff. But how much of your role there's someone else on this call I see who's from the utilities industry. And I'm curious, when you're in an industry like that is so in the thick of sustainability. Um, and then you have the customers on one end and the suppliers on the other side, both of which are super important to your reporting, to your ROI case, to the impact you make, to the whole business. How much of your job is working with peers up and downstream of the company? Do you do that very actively? Do you consider yourself part of a sales team in that way with the ability to reach out to different people at different companies? Like, what is your relationship like with suppliers and then with customers?
Yeah. So from a supplier standpoint, sorry, I'll start with customers. I mentioned already the many questionnaires that we work on. So far, that has been my personal engagement on the customer facing sustainability is responding to explicit questions, uh, and tracking those questions. No, a task that I think anyone in a sustainability role who faces customer questionnaires, a task that I think anyone in such a role should be taking on, whether they're asked to or not, is keeping a list of who the customer is, something about the opportunity, and what they're being asked, what that customer is asking of you as a company. And as I track that list, I see where there's recurring questions that we are today unable to answer or unable to provide documentation for. And that's often the basis for the business case to say, we've had X customers, maybe I can say X dollars in bid opportunity where we were asked to show something. There's examples there, like a product carbon footprint that we are in the process of exploring on this basis of customers asking. So that's one way that I've engaged in our downstream value chain. Upstream, we engage with our suppliers in a lot of different ways. One of which is around some of those compliance pieces. Uh, we are actively asking our suppliers where they are sourcing conflict minerals, 3TG, tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold, and what smelters they're using. We're evaluating those smelters against the Responsible Minerals Initiative's guidelines and assessments of smelters to see where there is high or low risk in our supply chain. There's other product compliance components around chemicals and other hazardous materials. Um, from a packaging standpoint, that extended producer responsibility, we need to be able to source our packaging to meet the standards of the regulations. We also are sourcing or at least working with product end of life partners who are able to recycle charging stations so that they don't end up in landfill, so that materials are recovered. So those are a few of the ways where we are really sitting in a crux of a value chain and not just in a silo of our own operations at our offices, which are not major impacts relative to up and down our value chain.
Yeah, that customer questionnaire thing is just the most consistent message across all of these. Last week, I was talking to Laura Shugam, who's the director of reporting at Syncora, which is like the 10th largest company in America and like a healthcare logistics company. And she said that she tracks every questionnaire and everything they get, and they giant company, but they got 175 questionnaires in the first half of their fiscal year.
Yeah.
And she just brings that number to anyone who has any sort of debate. She's like, look, it's not up to me here. There's 175 different customers who ask for stuff. Do you want to go answer them? No, great. Do you want to answer that you don't do something? No, of course not. That's how you build the case. That's just you just repeat that over and over again. Is there I actually don't know where I'm going to go with this question here, but do you think that that trend of questionnaires is just so common and so consistent and so important to building the case internally for sustainability work? If that does not exist, again, difficult for you to maybe talk about a charge point. You were at Republic Services before, again, so sustainability focused. But if that did not exist, if I went and joined some company where my customers are not banging on my door asking sustainability questionnaires, what else would you do? Like, what other approaches would you have? Or is it that not every company needs to lean into this work? How would you approach that?
I have never met a in-house corporate sustainability professional who has an absence of questionnaires. We all have the questionnaires. So I think that that is part of most major buyers'
But
ethos.
I will, just to make the point, I've met a lot of large corporations who don't have a sustainability person. So they're probably also getting the questionnaires and deciding they're fine.
That's for sure something that's out there. I've similarly had conversations with my colleagues, with my peers about lost business. Do you have use cases around lost business for a lack of some component of a sustainability program? And it's sometimes difficult to prove the negative. And when you miss a bid, I've even asked internally, when you miss a bid by some small number of points, then sustainability could have been the opportunity to win the bid, but it's not necessarily the only reason that you didn't miss the bid. But those incentives are there. A lot of the companies that don't have sustainability professionals or sustainability teams have someone else still answering the questionnaires, even if it's not someone who's embedded in the knowledge. I think there is some risk of greenwashing, and that is something I've seen that when it's a salesperson responding to a questionnaire, they tend to be more inclined to say, yes, we do this, yes, we do this, yes, we do this, without vetting whether or not that's the case. And so that's a liability for the business down the line. But the fact that there isn't a sustainability team is not necessarily emblematic of a lack of being asked and a lack of the potential for a business case for the organization to onboard someone. It could be more based on the company's current financial moment and them feeling like they don't have room for an additional cost center,
Yeah.
and it's a there's an expression that I'm translating that means small head, and I think it's a small-minded approach to think that when your customers are asking you these questions repeatedly, that there isn't a business case, that it's if you picture that as just a cost center, you might be missing the point.
Yeah. Um, I mean, there's a thing in startups all the time where a great way to think of a startup idea is take a very small feature of a large company. What is one tiny little thing that Google does? They have Google Forms. They probably don't have their best and brightest engineers working on Google Forms, but because they have Google Forms, it means it's a great feature. Can you turn that into a company? Well, out comes Typeform and SurveyMonkey and all these amazing things that just do the tiny little feature very, very well. The maybe terrible metaphor here is in sustainability, if you have a string to pull on, there's probably much more behind it. Like you might not say, I'm going to hire somebody, oh, because I got some questionnaires, I'm going to hire somebody to answer questionnaires. That's probably not the point. But if you pull on that string a little bit and say, what if they did all these other things? What if they did the emissions and they talked about the credits and they handled our risk assessments? Are there other ways in which we can open new customer relationships or get better bids from investors? Like you can pull that string and get a lot more of. Maybe a terrible metaphor, but perhaps one of my better transitions. I want to go back in reverse in time here and talk about your start at ChargePoint. You've
Sure.
been there for a year and a day, so mild stuff. What did
Yeah.
you why did you take that job? What was impressive or interesting to you about this job? And then did you come in with a very clear roadmap of saying, this is going back to they didn't really have someone in your role before, you were a net new person. Did you come in there with a clear roadmap and say, hey, my first year, I'm doing A, B, and C. That is what has to be done because I know those are the gaps. Or did you come in here blank slate and say, I can do anything. Let me figure out what those things are, and I'll come back to you in 3 months and I'll tell you what I think needs to be done. Why did you take that job and how did you decide what to work on first?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a necessary thing to talk about where I was coming from through my career, which I will do in its briefest form, which is I had worked at some startups in carbon credit offsets and climate risk software long before its days. Uh, and then I worked at EcoVadis, the ratings agency, where I was really on the outside looking into companies. I moved from EcoVadis into consulting, where I was still on the outside, but actually doing a lot of the work, working closely with the teams. From consulting, I moved in-house to, as you mentioned, Republic Services, where I was the subject matter expert, and there were many times where our three-person team was a little headless without the top role being filled, and I was de facto leading the team, but I was never formally charged with that senior role in the team. And so when I saw this ChargePoint opportunity to be the first director of sustainability here to help build something, to be brought in by a team who it was clear from interviews, and it's continued to be clear since I've been here, people who appreciate what I bring to the table, who recognize that sustainability is a business opportunity, who want to hear what I have to say and how I want to guide us to be everything that you've heard me say already, a better partner to our customers, um, have a more sticky service offering. That's something that was clear at ChargePoint from the beginning. And in that, when I first presented to my executive staff, coming up on a year ago, the big ask that I was going to have was, can I establish a sustainability steering committee, which is also part of the answer to your question of what was on my agenda. Can I establish a sustainability steering committee with leaders from across the verticals in the organization to be able to align on what we work on to make sure it's as valuable as possible for the company, to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. And the way that I presented it was a hypothetical, the next logical step would be for us to do this. And my CEO said, okay, let us know when it's established. So I didn't even have to ask the question because he got it. And that's what I really had in mind as what I was landing at ChargePoint, and he showed me that I was not wrong in thinking that that was the case. Did I have a clear agenda of what I wanted to work on? I had some parameters and some sense of what the framework would look like, but I didn't come in. I was very conscious not to come in as a bulldozer. I didn't want to say, I know what's right for you, company who I'm just learning who you are. I wanted to say, I have this diverse experience. I've sat in a company with a very mature sustainability program. I've also sat in tiny startups or supported startups as a consultant. I want to find what's the right path for ChargePoint amidst the many possibilities. For many companies, one of those things is a sustainability steering committee. For many companies, one of those things is a materiality assessment as the basis of establishing your sustainability strategy and your focus areas. For many companies, one of those things is a greenhouse gas inventory. And those are all things that have played out or are in the works. And that has been a more that I can't say more, but that has been a successful approach to have the knowledge and ability to adapt to what the circumstances are rather than to say, this is what you need to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You talked about double materiality. I know that was one of the things you did really early. I think you told me before we were talking about this that you thought maybe possibly you'd be subject to CSRD, and then omnibus happened, and then turned out you were not subject to the omnibus thing, but you already started this double materiality assessment aligned to CSRD standards. Walk me through why you continued down that path, even though it was not legally required, and what came out of that. Is that a path you would recommend everybody do? Is that a path that was, again, specific to ChargePoint, good for many companies, but not all? What was that process like?
Yeah. So to some extent, I inherited a scope of work that was already signed but hadn't kicked off when I arrived here. And I'm also conscious of the sunk cost fallacy. So it is incorrect to say we continued with it just because it was there. I think a materiality assessment, whether double materiality or single materiality assessment is an important early step for most companies to be able to sift through prioritizing among climate change and energy and talent attraction and attention and health and safety and anti-corruption and information security, these very diverse topics that you have to in some way put them on a level playing field in order to be able to prioritize across them. Um, so given that we had already begun on a path of double materiality, uh, and that double materiality through CSRD has increasingly become the standard, a potential eventual standard for us or for also a standard for many of our customers and also many of our suppliers. It felt like that was the correct way to align the foundation of our strategy building with the rest of the marketplace. And where it stands right now, as anyone who's gone through a double materiality assessment can attest, it's not always a straight path and it can take many turns. And there's a lot of moments where you're waiting for buy-in and waiting and seeking approvals. We've just now finalized that assessment. And on the back of that assessment was a little bit of work to say, okay, here's the assessment, which one of the features of a materiality assessment, or especially in the way that CSRD lines up a double materiality assessment, is that you're evaluating the potential positive and negative materiality of different topics, regardless of your management systems. So we then took the materiality assessment and said, what are our management systems? What is our core offering? What are we already doing? Where do we actually have levers to move? And from that, we're starting to build what is our sustainability strategy? What are the focus areas of sustainability, taking materiality into account, but not just purely translating, here's a materiality matrix with a bunch of dots on two axes. The ones in the top right are automatically the ones that we're focused on. That would be a simplistic view. And that that is not quite how we're taking the approach of building out our strategy as its own thing.
Yeah. Can you just a reminder, folks, chat's open, Q&A is open, so feel free to chime in whenever. But can you walk through the tactics, like as granular as you can? I think everyone's heard about the materiality. Some have gone
Yeah,
through it, some plan on going through it. But like, okay, I am going to do a double materiality assessment tomorrow. Where did you guys start? Is it a consultant? Is it a software? Is it a questionnaire? Is it like what happens in those first few steps? And like walk me through it as boring and tactily as possible. Because I'm really curious,
sure.
A, is this going to be um, consistent across companies and folks you can chime in? But B, what was the most valuable part of that process? What was the step that you would skip if you had to do this again next time? Walk me through that.
Yeah, for sure. So the scope of work that I inherited was consultant driven with the consultants partnering with a software company. So it was yes and. The first step was the software company's science-based materiality assessment is how they describe it, where they gave us quite a few data requests, things like headcount by country, revenue by country, supply base by country, um, some questions around our product offering, um, various other things to characterize our business and the potential risks across different geographies. And then they ran that data through their own algorithm, which looks at many different things. And I'm actually not that well versed on how it's parameterized. But what spit out was a preliminary list of material topics with some priority across those topics. The next step was consultant-driven stakeholder engagement, where different companies can handle this differently. Some companies have just surveys, some companies have just interviews. Um, we had a set of surveys and a workshop with key stakeholders from different areas within the business, some of whom explicitly represent internal or external stakeholder groups. And that survey process looked at each material topic as either so that the double materiality, you're looking at impact materiality on one axis, which is for a given topic, for climate change, what is my company's impact on the planet and society, people or people and the environment, and what is that topic's impact on my company's financial performance. So impact materiality and financial materiality. And the survey asked each of the stakeholders to rate each potentially material topic on those impact and financial materiality scales. The result was a preliminary matrix, or not actually, it wasn't in a matrix form, but a preliminary score for each topic with some combination of impact materiality, financial materiality in a positive sense or in a negative sense. And for some topics, it's simply positive, one of those four categories. So it might have just positive impact materiality, it might have just negative financial materiality. And from that output, the consultants led a workshop to kind of align on, are we comfortable with the relative ratings of these different topics? We actually focused on where there were the biggest gaps between the science-based materiality assessment and the survey responses. And once we confirmed through that workshop and some subsequent conversations, once we confirmed where each topic was scored, that led to the consultants creating a matrix. And a materiality matrix is not a defined thing that needs to come from the regulations or from the rules. It's just kind of the de
A helpful
facto
way to
way that
understand
most
this.
companies show
Yeah.
those positive and or those impact and financial materiality on a positive and negative
How do
basis.
those executive surveys and interviews go? I'm curious because traditionally, in climate risk, which is the work that I know better, there's a standard approach of doing this thing, which is you go to a bunch of executives, you say, "Hey, chief marketing officer and chief financial officer and VP of people. Tell me, what do you think is our exposure to natural disasters today and in the future, and to all these different transition risks, such as carbon tax and changing global
And they
regulations and
give you a big
changing environment?
shrug.
And they're like, I'm the VP of marketing. You think I've thought about climate change
Yeah.
before? Or like, I'm the head of people. Like, I don't know anything about a carbon tax. And it's, I think that's what Beehive's doing well because we don't make you do that. But I think it's just like this is not their area of expertise. What was your experience engaging? Again, maybe ChargePoint people know a little bit more about some of these aspects than a standard company. But were there knowledge gaps between the people and what you're asking for? Because sometimes that just like feels like a lovely thing on paper. Oh, go ask the executives; they'll tell you what matters. But if they've never thought about some of these issues, they're not going to tell you anything that and they'll say, sure, yeah, climate change sounds like it sucks. Hope it doesn't happen. Can I get back to work?
So there's for sure a delicate balance between getting all of the stakeholders sufficiently up to speed, sufficiently in educating them enough that they're able to respond to the the questions they're being asked versus what is their attention span and time that you're able to ask for them to engage in this exercise. And that's something that I worked with our consultants on. I did a fair amount of teeing up these topics to the stakeholders, and the stakeholders ended up being the members of the Sustainability Steering Committee, who come, as I said, from the different verticals across the organization. So they represent different interests in that sense. The consultants put together pre-reads and guidance within the survey itself to help limit those shrugs, those kind of deer in headlights view. Um, is it a perfect exercise where you're getting exactly the information that you want to get? No, a materiality assessment is not just science, it's science and art. And that's why the surveys were followed up with a workshop so that we can talk about them and have conversation and say, make sure that you realize what it is you were being asked. And now that you know this, does it make sense that this topic is in the bottom left or that this other topic is in the top right? And there was a little movement that happened through those iterative conversations. But it's definitely true that the people who need to engage because they represent the different stakeholder interests are also not the experts on the questions that they're being asked. They're the experts on their stakeholder group. And finding that blend is the blend of sufficient education without overburdening is a delicate balance.
Yeah, I imagine part of your strategy there, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but part of your solution to that, and part of your way to strike that balance, is to stand up that sustainability steering committee. And those are people who you could educate a little bit more, who might have more interest, who will do their assigned homework reading because they have opted in to being part of this committee. You had this great line when we were doing some prep for this, where you framed the committee, where you told everybody that this is not a committee where we are going to seek consensus. This is a place where there's a chance to voice concern. And I like that framing because your goal is not to say, this is a place where I'm going to bring you something, you're going to rubber stamp it, and I'm going to go back and do it. This is a place to debate what I should do, debate what the company should focus on, debate what the numbers might mean, and for us to have those debates here before they go out into
Yeah.
the world and people debate us elsewhere. I'm going to just read that quote one more time because I think that's really what I want to ask about. What you went in saying is this is not going to be a place where we seek consensus. This is a place where there's a chance to voice concern. Tell me about that framing that you came in
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. I wanted to avoid a trapping of committees where a committee that has to come to a consensus can take forever to make a decision. I also wanted to empower my committee members to really tell me when they had concerns. And so the quote that you shared, my words from our prep conversation were how I almost opened our first sustainability steering committee meeting. And I said to my committee members, I want you to engage. I want you to share your feedback. And I'm not expecting us to come to a consensus does anyone have concerns with that approach? And there were no concerns raised. And so that's been the way that we've been functioning since
That was
then.
the first. That was the first consensus.
That was
Of
the first that me proposing that approach was the first attempt at that approach, and the response was non-dissent, and therefore that is where we landed.
Do you have any favorite examples of how that invited conflict has helped your work?
Um, so there are different levels of engagement by different members of the steering committee, which is going to be true in any committee. And I think the committee members who are most passionate and engaged in the topic of sustainability and also around sustainability as a lever for the company to be a better performer in the marketplace have felt empowered to share their ideas, to ask, to push back. And I tend to see the same several people engage more each time. But as we've had subsequent meetings, I've seen more and more people kind of enter the conversation. And um, it has not, it's never been one of those things where the same people are taking over the conversation. It's just the same people are engaging when I ask for questions. And by having given them space to ask, that's invited more people to also engage. So that's not quite the answer to your question. I don't have an exact example of where inviting dissent led to a major iteration, but there certainly have been times where the comments that have come through have led to a course correction.
Yeah, I like it. As we move into the last phase here, I dropped into the chat some of the upcoming Beeklies we do. We do this every single week. I try not to miss a Thursday. Next week, we're talking to Kier Ferber at Universal Music Group. The week after, I'm doing a Beehive product training. So I just talk for the product and the roadmap for an hour if that's interesting to you. The week after, Charles Scott at Unity, a $2 billion revenue gaming engine software company. And then the week after that, we'll be in Boston. We are missing a Beekly because we'll be in Boston for Boston Climate Week and are doing a drinks that Tuesday night. So if you're in Boston, come say hello. Um, Mike, I want to kind of bring this back to something we talked about earlier, which is regulation and maybe the current moment in time. Regulation, some of it is going away, some of it's being resilient, some new things like EPR are coming back. What are the most important regulations that really matter to you? And I know that one of the very first times we met, you said a line to somebody else, and I just overheard it. Where you talked about how at least 10% of your job is just reading 5 newsletters a day, just like having your fingers on the pulse and understanding the zeitgeist of what's going on and regulations at every conference and every conversation. Like that is the zeitgeist right now because that is what people are hanging their hat on. What are the regulations that matter to you? And talk a little about how you personally stay on top of that, stay informed, and don't focus on the noise of everything going around of stuff that might just not matter to you, but focus on what really drives the needle.
Yeah, it's not a silver bullet process. I subscribe to a bunch of newsletters. I subscribe to the Trellis Briefing, to ESG Today, to ESG Dive, to a whole bunch of vendor-driven newsletters where they're giving you a taste of what's going on in the news that maybe it's really news driven. Maybe it's a teaser for what their offering is, and being able to discern which is which helps me know, oh, that vendor, I'm never going to read their newsletter. That vendor, I'm going to read it pretty consistently. Um,
I'm terrified of pissing off Mike. That is my greatest fear in business.
um, I mean, the type of vendor that has something like the Beekly, where this is right now, there's no marketing in this conversation. I'm not even talking about what you do as a company. I mentioned a former employer that did something overlapping, and that's the closest we came to your offering. That's the type of vendor who I'm going to read their content or ingest their content. But um, one of the questions that I ask whenever I see something about regulations is, are we in scope or will we be in scope? We are in scope, as I said, for conflict minerals reporting, for a lot of extended producer responsibility based on our revenue and headcount. We are not in scope for either of the California climate rules. We're not in scope for CSRD, but we still are paying a lot of attention to them. One day we will be in scope for the California rules, and we want to make sure that we're prepared for that moment when the time comes. We also, I see new regulations come up all the time, proposed regulations. I work with industry organizations to track some of that. We have a policy team, and I encourage any sustainability professional to have a close relationship with your public policy team to know what they're tracking and to make sure that you're in an open conversation with them. I actually just maybe, yeah, I think this week heard someone, yeah, it might have been yesterday, heard that someone is using an AI agent to trawl news for emerging regulations. I'm intrigued and I'm probably going to explore that so that I can spend a little less active time looking for things, especially on a busy day. I'm less likely to see headlines, and then I'm going to rely more on the weekend review newsletters that come at the end of the week or over the weekend. But it is difficult to avoid all the noise because there is so much noise. Uh, you kind of learn by doing to some extent, but um, it takes a discerning eye and a lot of support.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I have a lot of opinions of the AI policy tracker. Long story short, we tried to build that at Beehive about a year ago and spent maybe 4 or 5 months on it. Had some amazing pilots going with really big companies, like the Gap was using us and Atlassian was using it. And it was cool and it should work. Like it really, really should work. The challenge is you can't, especially for something like ChargePoint, you have to go really high. So what is the country doing? You have to go in the middle. So what is the state doing? And you kind of have to go local because if one county or one city has rules around electric vehicle stations, you need to know that too. And it was such a big world of laws that just cataloging it and making sure you're tracking the right things was very difficult. And then on the flip side, there's so much nuance about whether it does or does not apply to you, or whether it might apply to you soon, or whether it applies to you if there's an unknown bit of information that we don't have. Maybe impossible to be 100% right. And if you're just 95% right, and I tell you, Mike, I'm pretty sure you don't have to comply with this. And if I'm wrong, I'm in big trouble. So that was our
Yeah.
experience with it. But I talked a lot about this on LinkedIn and elsewhere because I think it should be solved. Like it is a solvable issue. And maybe if we were doing it as a side project, if somebody really put their heart into it, that is exactly what needs to exist there. But we'll see. So I'm wishing whoever figures that one out a lot of luck because it was a personal failure of mine, personal effort.
It's worth a
Um,
lot of sustainability professionals' time if they do solve it.
it's worth a lot of time. I know a few people trying. I pointed you in their direction. Um, so going to regulation, electric vehicles, and there's someone on this call as well who probably cares a lot about your approach here. Electric vehicles have been in the thick of it. And when we scheduled this webinar, probably 2 months ago, my question would have been something like, man, doesn't it suck? The IRA is gone and um, uh, we gave back $1 billion to a or $7 billion or whatever to an oil company or to an energy company and not build wind farms, and electrical vehicles infrastructure is gone, and Ford stopped building electric vehicles and GM stopped building, and everyone's done building electric vehicles. And that's going to be a huge challenge for ChargePoint. You don't have to talk about company strategy here, but what is your personal approach to that? My question is going to still be that because all those things are still true. But with the slight adjustment that if you read the New York Times or the Journal over the last 2 weeks, there's all of a sudden renewed interest in electric vehicles. As oil costs spike, as instability comes, as we're not sure what the cost of gas is going to be, maybe electric vehicles aren't so bad. And maybe there's renewed interest in EVs. How do you take all of that in? And how does that, if at all, maybe it's just interesting noise and not news, but how does that impact the work that you do?
The first thing I want to say is just as much as a lot of the manufacturers have pulled back from their ambitions, none of them are stopping to make EVs, except for the ones that have gone out of business, which is a different story. But all the major automakers still have many EV lines that they're pushing through. ChargePoint just published some research in the last few weeks that for me is the most meaningful piece of an answer to your question, where if this is the uptick in electric vehicles over the last several years, this is the uptick of electric vehicle charging stations, public electric vehicle charging stations, which means there's that big delta of unmet demand. And for the company, for ChargePoint and the industry of building EV charging, whatever all of those potential impacts are of the current political climate, it's not going to hit EV charging. It's going to be a delay before it hits EV charging. And by the time that happens, who knows where else we'll be. And you're right. Like I live in California where I've seen $6 gas and
I think $8 somewhere in LA, according to Bill Maher. So it's
well,
up there.
someone posted a picture of this one notably expensive station in I think Palo Alto where it was
Yeah.
something like that. But yeah, it is a time when people are thinking these prices are not just a blip. It's going to take time for them to come down, even if the war stops right now. What's that mean for future outlook? And there is re-engaged interest in EVs. There are a lot of, for the first time, automakers making more and more affordable in the context that any car is affordable these days, but affordable EVs. And that is a different slice than has ever been a different slice of the market than has ever been addressed by EVs, at least in North America. And we are feeling good about that delta and the ability for us to continue to grow and build and support our customers and support the market need for more charging infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, we started Beehive shortly before the elections. We started in summer 2024. And a lot of people during that summer were investors would ask me, what happens if a Trump administration takes over? What happens if a Harris administration takes over? And I said, you know what? And this is Beehive specific, but I said, if a Harris administration wins, that's could be good for the business. Probably the SEC will have their laws and stuff, but also means tons of competition, tons of attention, tons of hype. Things don't go away. If a Trump administration wins, probably nobody wants to start businesses like this. Probably there's going to be a little less attention, but the delta between the need and the supply is still going to be really big. So we got plenty to do. And then in 4 years, we'll see what happens. We'll be in a better position, and then maybe the needs will change again. And I think a lot of sustainability work is like that right now, which is personal politics and preferences aside, the delta between the need and what you are doing today is still so large that
Yeah.
there's still so much to do before we're out of things to do or out of money to make or out of opportunities to tap that are financially better. Like there's just so much to do. So all right, go spend the next 2.5 years doing those things. And then maybe not, but maybe in 2.5 years that changes again. And all of a sudden we're in a new market, maybe in less than 2.5 years, but we're in a new market, things change. Like the concept of just keep on keeping on. I think it feels like a very relevant. That wasn't Green Biz 2025 that everyone was depressed. I think Green Biz 2026 that was sort of the vibe. Was a lot of how do I just continue this work because there's so much work to continue to do. And one day at a time, we'll see. Some things will come back, some things will change, some things will evolve, some things won't. We need to like figure out where this market is going, but it certainly hasn't gone away. Certainly for someone like ChargePoint.
No, yeah, it has not. It has not at all.
Amazing. Mike, you're the man. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining. You can learn more about Mike on LinkedIn. I'm going to send out his profile after this. I hope to see you guys next week at the Universal Music Group conversation. Kira is a star. I hope you're safe from your earthquake, Mike. And to everyone
Thank you.
else, happy holidays, whatever it is you're celebrating. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Bye.